Welcome to Lifting as We Climb, the Dr. Catherine Roma Commission for 2020. Since we were not able to perform this piece this spring, I have some wonderful guests to introduce this commission and share about the history and music that Joan Szymko has created. So I'm going to invite you each to introduce yourselves, starting with Kathy.
Hello, everyone. Wonderful to be here with you. My name is Catherine Roma, and I started Anna Cruces Women's Choir in 1975 in Philadelphia, still going, and started Muse, Cincinnati's Women's Choir, and that is still going in 37 years. So I love working with women's voices and women's choirs, women's organizations. And my most recent choir is Hope Through Harmony at Dayton Correctional Institution.
Excellent. Thank you, Kathy. And Tammy.
Hello, I'm Dr. Tammy Kernodle. I'm a musician. I'm an arranger. I'm a musicologist and a professor of musicology at Miami University in Ohio. My specialty area in research and teaching is largely African American music, 19th, 20th, and 21st century African American music, both popular and classical music. My work tends to focus on representations of gender and performance. And I also work on jazz. So happy to be here.
Thank you, Tammy. Joan.
I'm Joan Szymko. And Kathy, you are way too humble. because I got my start, or when I set out as a choral conductor, I became involved with the Seattle Women's Ensemble in 1980, and that group was very much inspired by Anna Cruces, what Kathy Roma was doing back east. And I actually first met Kathy at a GALA leadership conference, and it was Kathy Roma who and that conference, the focus of was to get more women's choirs involved in GALA. So I just wanted to put that shout out to Kathy and also to GALA. I have been in Portland for the last, 26 years. I'm currently the artistic director of Aurora Chorus, a large women's community chorus, and I've been blessed to have been commissioned to write for choirs in all genres, from children's choirs to professional choirs, collegiate, etc. So I'm really, really happy to be here with all of you. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. And I'm Jane Ramsire Miller. I conduct an LGBTQ and allies chorus in Minnesota called One Voice Mixed Chorus. And I also serve as artistic director for GALA Choruses, which is a network of LGBTQ choruses across North America and beyond. So thank you to all three of you for being here today and sharing about this commission. Kathy, can you talk to us about the Dr. Roma Commission and the commissioning project, how it began and how we are here today?
Okay, I'd love to. So when I retired from Muse after 30 years, that would be 2013, Muse wanted to know how they could honor me and got in touch with Jane and the people at GALA and said, what can we do? And so over the many years that I've been conducting women's choirs, they thought, well, maybe there could be a women's commissioning project. Became known as the Roma Commission. And 4 years ago, we kicked off the first project with Kayla Pearson, a composition that she wrote. Then for this next one, we realized it was 2020. And it was going to be the 100th anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment. And what could we do? And so, I said to myself, voting rights, wow, what a mess we're in right now. And we can't really, I want to acknowledge that this was an incredible struggle, really starting in 1848 and culminating, coming into 1920. But where are we now? And so I wanted to honor the incredible struggle that went on for the passage of the 19th Amendment. At the same time, I wanted to address what's been happening since then, and particularly what's happening now. So I gathered together some people. Tammy Kernodle was one. Ann Dexter Gordon, a friend of mine from high school, is a colonial American historian and was the editor of the Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton papers. So I know she was well versed in this. And then Jane and Kathleen Hansen, conductor of the San Diego Women's Chorus. So we sat together. Gosh, did we Zoom? Maybe we did before COVID.
Or phone calls. I think it was conference calls back then.
And we talked about how would we do this? How would we approach organizing a composition that would address all of these different things? So we all said, okay, let's take specific parts. Let's take quotes. Let's look for quotes from the 19th century. Let's look for quotes from the 20th century and prominent women that were involved in the struggle. And we talked about incarcerated people and how they are not able to vote. We talked about indigenous people. We talked about all kinds of women, and how would we put this into a composition? So I looked today, and it was 2017, October, and we compiled 11 pages of notes to put at the feet of the person who was selected. And then Joan Szymko was selected, and we placed this volume that we had worked on with her. And then she, of course, being, she told us, that she would definitely consult everything, the work that we had done, but that she loves to do her own research. So that's how we got to this commission, Lifting as We Climb.
Excellent. And we're going to hear a little bit more about Joan's process in just a minute. But I want to give you a little background. So Lifting as We Climb was commissioned and it's part of a consortium. And there were 18 women's choirs, SSAA choirs, who were supposed to perform the piece this past spring, so spring of 2020. And because of COVID, only 4 of them were able to actually perform it. And all 18, well, 15 of these 18 were also going to perform it at the GALA Festival in July 2020 in Minneapolis. And so since that was not able to happen, we decided to compile some video recordings of a few of the choruses who did perform it, and just give you, as listeners, a little bit of background about how this came to be, and about Joan's process, and about both the history and the connection to our current political situation. So, Tammy, can you talk a little bit more in depth about why this commission right now, why in August now?
Well, I think one part is exactly what Kathy said, stopping to commemorate what was this historic moment in 1920 that gave women the right to vote, but also to stop and consider in that 100 years how that fight continued and how that is still a part of our current political language and climate at this time, and what must be done to hold on to this. So this is a very timely commission, and few of us would have known what 2020 would have shaped up to be, and the conversations we have. And that one of the most prominent voices that is also aligned in this work passed away, transitioned, John Lewis, who continued that fight, and that fight not being simply one that was centered in race, but also extended beyond race to gender, and even beyond our binary constructions of gender and identity, right? And so, this work is really a stronger contextualization of what has been a rich tapestry of individuals and voices and experiences that have been a part of an ongoing fight to ensure that citizens' rights and how that is defined through the act of voting is maintained. I remember in our early initial discussions about this piece, one of the individuals around the table kept saying, citizens' rights, right? And we take that often for granted,
Yeah.
that as citizens, we have a right to the ballot box. But this has not always been the case, even though, people have been counted as a part of this larger society. So this also coincides and intersects with the census that is currently happening, right? And who is counted, and what does that mean for us?
Yeah. Okay, Joan, we gave you a massive task. This landed at your feet. Can you talk about what was exciting about working on this commission and what was terrifying? What were the challenges? Give us your process.
Yes. Well, what was exciting was to be, well, let me start by saying that as a composer and actually also as a conductor, programming concert programs, my strength is as a storyteller, both in my composing and in my work as a conductor. And so what I was excited about in this project is that I was giving the opportunity to create a window for the listener to see something and feel something universal in a very specific story. And that's what I always try to do with my composing, with my storytelling. So it was, yes, it was very daunting, but it was exciting to feel like I would be a part of this important commemoration. And it was also, I mentioned before about being woke, you keep getting woke about things, right? It was exciting to me to learn this history. It was exciting to me to challenge my own, preconceptions or ignorance. I mean that in the literal sense of that word, not knowing really this history. We all have snippets. Oh, there's Seneca Falls, and there's Susan B. Anthony, and there's this, all of these snapshots, and we think we know what they are. So it was very exciting to really dig deep and be given this opportunity. I don't know if the challenge of it was that it's an enormous arc, a lot of history.
Mm-hmm.
And like any commission, I don't know what kind of music or what music I'm going to compose until I know what I'm going to say. So I know what the words are. So for me, the whole, most of this, I'm a composer, yes, you commission a composer, but much of this process for me was the research, was the trying to, find the points that I felt were important to make to tell the whole story. And then honestly, and this from last summer when, the libretto came like a month later than the music, because I was editing. I mean, if I had included all the information and all the incredible words from all these extraordinary women, if I had included all that, this thing would have been 45 minutes long, So it was, yeah. So the challenge, the excitement and the challenge was to try to tell this story. I think I was told 3 songs and a 15-minute work. And I was like, this ain't, that's going to be impossible. You don't just even tell the suffrage story, but let alone to include, the ramifications of just what Channing was talking about, about our rights as citizens and what does that mean, and so yeah, very exciting, very challenging, and really rewarding.
Yeah. Well, we want to make sure that our viewers get to actually see and listen to a few of the movements. So we're gonna let them see movement 1. This is performed by the Seattle Women's Chorus. It's called What We Do Now. Kathy and Joan, can you set us up to hear this movement? What are we experiencing? What should we listen for?
When I found this poem, I was so relieved because I was like, how am I going to set this piece up? And I found this poem on the website is called splitthisrock.org, and it's a website for poets who want to have a greater role in fostering for a network of socially engaged poets. Let's put it that way. And it's called What We Do Now, but it says it's after Gwendolyn Brooks. And the poem that she is kind of referencing is Gwendolyn Brooks' poem, We Be Cool. So this poem is we mourn, we bless, we. Okay, so just to give you that context. But the reason why, like I said, I was relieved is because I thought, oh my goodness, everything is here. You know, as I mentioned, this is a long arc. This story, you know, as Coretta Scott King says in The Last Movement, I mean, the struggle is never ending. It keeps going on. And everything in this poem, I thought, spoke to what I was told I really needed to do with this commission, was to talk about now, right? What I wanted to do, and what you can listen for in this piece, is the emotional shifts in the music. I mean, okay, when you think about, okay, finish this sentence. When you talk about instruments, okay, and you say wailing, what's the word? Saxophone, right? A wailing saxophone. So that's why I chose saxophone originally, and specifically, you know, for this piece. But there are shifts in the poem. We mourn, we bless, we blow, we wail, we wind down. We sit, we spin, we blind, we bend, we bow, we hem meaning to constrict. And then there's a period. That's the first feeling. And we mourn, we bless. That to me is not up tempo. That is, you know, so the piece has kind of a languid kind of a feel at the beginning, right? And then it shifts into a very energized feeling. It goes from this weariness to this kinetic energy, and then that moves into this statement of perseverance, you know. And the music shifts again, but it's not the blues at the beginning. It's more of just a real. What I wanted, it was heart. The last part is heartfelt. You know, tonight I'm here, and I'm tired. In other words, yeah, I'm still weary, I'm still tired, but I'm awake, and I'm alive. You know, and of course, you're gonna, before that segment, you're gonna hear a moment that is totally about what's happening now, and I guess we'll talk about that on the other side.
Yeah. Great, thank you. So this is the first movement of Lifting as We Climb by Joan Szymko, and it's performed by the Seattle Women's Chorus. Thank you to the Seattle Women's Chorus with conductor Paul Caldwell for that recording. We're going to talk a little bit about the title of this piece, Lifting as We Climb. Tammy, can you describe to us where does this phrase come from and why is it important in this context?
Lifting as We Climb was part of a larger speech um, that was given by Mary Church Terrell, who was one of the Black suffragists. Mary Church Terrell was also very important because she became the first president for the National Colored Women's Association. And so it's a part of the history that we often don't talk about, but it also reveals to us what was the political ideology that was being developed by Black women in the 19th century that fed into the larger narrative of Black political thought in the Gilded Age. So Mary Church Terrell, Ida B. Wells, Anna Julia Cooper, these women were talking from a point of privilege, but in their privilege, that what they understood was that it could not be Du Bois's mythological talented 10th, right, who had the privilege of wealth and education, only being a part of this narrative of freedom, but that one had to reach back and pull one's brother and sister of lesser means along. So as we climb and ascend in privilege and power, we must also lift others, right? And so it was part of broader narratives that were about voting and access to power and agency, but was also a reflection of how Black women had access to education, both here in America and abroad during the 19th century, and how they strategized about how to empower their own communities. Now, I would like to say a little bit more by saying that Mary Church Terrell also marched in the 1913 suffrage march alongside the women of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, which was a sorority created at Howard University by 22 women. And that sorority was focused on public service. And these women embedded themselves into this conversation about the right to vote, even though they were segregated in that march. And so in many ways, her participation in that march with these women was something that I think this piece also displays, which is the forging of generational ties and generational legacies, because Mary Church Terrell was much older in many cases than these women from Howard University that were participating in this march.
So, a really important 100th anniversary of this event, but also an anniversary wrought with inequities. Kathy, how did our committee address that as we were planning?
Well, I think that, we said, well, we have to go back to 1848. We have to go back there. And there were no women of color there. And it was not till 1851, I think, that Sojourner Truth was at the Women's Rights Convention held here in Akron, Ohio. So we begin to get women's voice. I think that's where she had made her speech, Ain't I a Woman? So we begin to see some change there. And then I was so grateful that to learn about Frances Ellen Watkins Harper and Mary Church Terrell and some of the other African American women that were so vital in this. And of course, I also liked that some of them were had lived in Ohio and had taught at Wilberforce University here in Ohio. So the beautiful part was that there were many names and many women who I had been unfamiliar with, but we wanted to bring their voice into this. And so then that was part of our study that we did, was to realize that there were Black and white women at this time working together. So I think that that's part of the wonderful education from myself, just like Joan talked about, that it was a journey. to understand the diversity of voices that were actually a part of things. And then, of course, there were splinters and things that happened that were to change the trajectory of history.
I just wanted to just mention about Seneca Falls. You said there were no Black women there, but however, Frederick Douglass was there.
Right.
And Frederick Douglass was very key, and his presence there actually gave a lot of weight to this gathering. And he was one of the few people who stood with Caddy Stanton when she had the audacity to suggest at Seneca Falls that women's suffrage be one of the rights that they were requesting. He stood right behind her and said, "Yeah, he called himself a women's rights man, like from the very beginning."
And the call that did not go over well, right? When she called for that.
No, but she got her way. It ended up in the they call them the sentiments. They ended up in the,
yeah.
But no, there was Lucretia Mott was like, "Honey, you don't want to do this. They're going to think we're nuts."
Yeah.
You know?
I think in bringing up Frederick Douglass, this brings another angle to this conversation, because why he was championing this right to vote, he was positioning that from a standpoint that white women should have the right to vote, but Black women should not have the right to vote until Black men had it.
Right.
And so when we talk about this, when we really untangle these narratives, what we're faced with is, how did Black women and women of color navigate racist ideologies on one side, but the sexist ideologies on the other, right? And so, women of color in particular have those two barriers to navigate in this particular historical story, right? And so, in many cases, you have men who are positioning themselves in authoritative ways, but they're not always extending that to the women that are part of their communities. And so that's where Sojourner Truth and Frederick Douglass split over that, because he says that Black women should not have the right to vote before Black men should have the right to vote.
Yeah.
Interesting, this bringing in gender, and male privilege in this conversation. The progressive soup, in the mid 19th century, it was rooted in abolitionism. So all of the women's rights people were all prominent abolitionists. One of the quotes, actually, it's a quote that is sung that starts out the second movement. "We ask no favors of our sex, only that you take your feet from off our necks." That was written by the Sarah Grimke. The Grimke sisters were vilified for having the audacity as women to speak at abolitionist conferences, because women were not allowed a voice; they were not allowed to speak.
Yeah.
It's everything's all connected.
Yeah. So Joan, talk about also how is this piece, especially that first movement, really connected to where we are exactly today, this spring, in what's blowing up across our nation?
The very first word, we mourn.
Yeah.
I think that this COVID moment, I've been calling it the grand pause, that we're living in right now. I believe that if not for COVID, people would not have had the attention to really look at that 8+ minute long video of George Floyd being murdered, and to feel. That was the thing. They felt the horror of it, right? And so the very first, line of this piece, we mourn, we bless, but we wail. Okay. The lips, we teeth, we praise, we protest. We are no longer going to be silent. Not that we were ever silent, but that there are more people standing up, and more white people standing with people of color in this struggle. But this idea of praising and protest, celebrating the people in in our community who are putting themselves out there, you know, on the line, celebrating each other for standing up, you know, protesting. And then this next line, which, you know, again, in this context, and when I wrote this piece, it was a different context. We document and we drama. If not for that young woman with her phone, documenting what happened, you know, where would we be?
Can I say something as well? Because I think what's important to talk about in this discussion is the role of women musicians and how women from within our communities and on larger platforms have been at the forefront of the very thing you're saying about documenting and oftentimes in a very ritualized way of leading us as communities and as bodies into this act of public resistance and this act of public activism, you know, and I think that draws in the legacy of Kathy, because Kathy is a part of this larger history of women, Black and white, Indigenous, Latinx, Asian, who have used music as a platform, as a conduit for the anger that we see in our community, right? Who speak to those absent narratives that are present. And what I mean by those absent narratives is that we see these moments, these horrific moments, right? But what is often missing is the voices of the mothers and the sisters and the cousins and the grandparents of these individuals, right, who have had this inflicted upon them. So that when we see pictures of lynchings, we never see the women of these men who have been lynched, right? And so where do their voices come from? And their voices often come in song, either in churches, in homes, you know, Billie Holiday in 1939 giving us Strange Fruit, right? You know, and so this piece is a part of a historical record, right? Of how women have utilized the one thing that has been an equalizer for them and opened their doors and allowed them to have say within this larger spectrum of political and social change, and that is music. Because when we've often been silenced from giving speeches, and that's the difference between, a Susan B. Anthony and a Sojourner Truth or a Mary Church Terrell being able to speak, right, in the 19th century and early 20th century. And we've seen the absence of these voices at the March on Washington, where women are not speaking, right? Or we see the absence of sometimes women's voices when we see political pundits on television today, right? So we have been the shapers and articulators of political ideology, but that's often happened in our music and not necessarily just in our spoken word.
So I don't know what you have all experienced in the marches in your city, but in Minneapolis, they are almost entirely led by people of color. And they're not the chants and the chants in particular are not chants that are familiar to me, and they are amazing and powerful, and they're accompanied by drums, and they're very musical. And I hadn't thought about that, Tammy, until you talked about it. But that's one of my favorite part of these marches are the voices and the music that's coming through.
Mm-hmm. But that's the unifier.
Yes,
no matter
absolutely.
who you are, no matter how you identify yourself, music is the one thing that we all have. And it is the one thing that has enabled us to preserve our sense of who we are, even in the face of opposition, right? But it's also allowed us to speak to what others, have experienced in ways. And I think this is what this piece represents, right? And how it does tie into Kathy's legacy in her work and the repertoire that she performed all those years with Muse, right? And all the choirs that she's engaged with, and what you all do on an active basis. As a historian, I look to you to write that history, but you are writing it. You're invoking the ancestors in the present, and you're speaking to the yet to come in hopes that the yet to come can be different from what the present and the past has been. And that's a powerful role that we must recognize, you know, as women musicians. And I use musicians in the most global, general, expansive way as possible.
Tammy, talk about this arc of history. I've heard you talk about this. Take us backwards a little bit.
Well, I mean, so what do you mean by take us back? So you
You,
never ask a historian to take us back
yeah.
because we will be here.
Particularly, you were talking about what happened after the Civil War and what got us to this place.
Yeah. Well, that the period after the Civil War that we call Reconstruction, which is 1865 to 1877, is a very peculiar period because it's a moment where one, we're starting to see women and people of color, formerly enslaved people, having access to education in a rapid amount of a period of time, right? From freedom schools to normal universities that become Black colleges, right? So you're seeing in the South, right, an underclass of enslaved people trying to empower themselves. But we're also experiencing this at this time because men are given the right to vote in this period, right? We have Black men who are given the right to vote in this period. We have them changing what is the power base of the South. So you've got more people who can vote, right? But women are still unable to vote, right? In any way, shape, or form. So at the same time that Reconstruction is happening and we're rethinking what is America, right? We also have women who are positioning themselves as power brokers, and they are instigating this activity, this move to the ballot box. Because what's clear to most people is that the ballot box is the way to shift the power dynamics, right? And so you have this, as Joan said, you have this coalition of organizations, of women, of men who are positioning themselves. You've got upper class Black women who are also creating comparable clubs, right? But we're also in a period in time where our conception of popular culture and music is changing. So it's a very, very fertile period to mine and look at because historically, this is where we're coming into our crafting of the mythology of who we are as Americans. And what will be the mythos of America, and the reconceptualization of what the founding of our country is. So that period from 1865 up until 1920 is a very important period in terms of us understanding American history, political history, American social history, but also American musical history. Because we very quickly decide that we will consume people's culture, but we will not accept them. And not just Black people, we consume people's ethnic culture and we create this mythos of it being American culture, and we globalize that, but at the same time, we are denying people real access to democracy.
Wow.
Thank you. Well, and just to be really clear about this, so while on paper in 1920, all women were given the right to vote, in reality, only white women experienced universal suffrage because the voting rights of African Americans, Native Americans, and other targeted groups were suppressed by practices and policies in states and regions across our country. So it wasn't actually until 1965, so 45 years later, that Congress passed the Voting Rights Act. That was largely inspired by voting rights marches in Alabama. President Lyndon Johnson signed the measure in 65 with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, and other icons of the civil rights movement who were present. So it was that act that finally barred many of the policies and practices that states had been using to limit and suppress voting. although, as we know, new tactics are back in operation in 2020. Joan, we asked you to write three movements, and an additional movement appeared, which was really beautiful. And it's called We Are All Bound Up Together. And you chose to set it in unison. Can you lead us into hearing that movement?
Sure. And just briefly, how it came to come into the work is that I was so moved by that speech that Frances Ellen Watkins Harper gave at the first women's conference after the Civil War. And there was again already this huge conflict around the 15th Amendment and Black men voting before white women. And she just laid it out on the line, you know. She just said, hey, you know, you're talking about rights here. I'm talking about wrongs. And then she gave the fuller context, right? And within that is this, you know, we are all bound up together in one great bundle of humanity. And I just, honestly, God, this piece just wrote itself. I just sat down at the piano and I just had that quote and I just started singing. You know, a lot of how I compose through my voice, I sing. And I think that's why this piece in particular feels like it's in the body a lot, because it comes from the voice. And why it's in unison, unison is the great equalizer, you know. It's an equalizer, and you are naked. I think that, and you know, those of you, you're all nodding, you know, all the, and your musicologists, but all us conductors know that one of the hardest things to do is to get a unison, you know, that really sings, you know. And so, and I think by it being in this naked unison, this piece is the singers are telling this history, but then they're just laying themselves bare.
So this is the Portland Lesbian Choir performing We Are All Bound Up Together.
You white women speak here of rights. I speak of wrongs. This grand and glorious revolution which has commenced will fail to reach its climax of success until out the length and breadth of the American Republic, the nation shall be so colorblind as to know no man by the color of his skin or the curl of his hair. It will then have no privileged class trampling upon and outraging the unprivileged classes, but will be then one great privileged nation, whose privilege will be to produce the loftiest manhood and womanhood that humanity can attain.
We are all bound up together. We are all bound up together in one great bundle of humanity. 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 We are all bound up together. 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 We are all bound up together.
That was We Are All Bound Up Together, an additional little movement that is part of Lifting as We Climb. It was performed by the Portland Lesbian Choir and conducted by Mary McCarty. Now, I understand that on August 26, 1920, Secretary of State Colby signed this amendment into law, but I heard that no one else was in the room where it happened. What happened? happened? Why was this guy all alone signing this amendment into law? Tammy, can you help us out?
Well, some historians have quoted his words by saying, that he did not want to bring much publicity to the event, for it to be kind of viewed as policy as usual. And another part of that was also about who to select to be in the room, right? I mean, it's well known that there were rivalries, and there were stretched and tempered relationships as it relates to the suffrage movement, and people on different ideological planes. And so, one of the things that oftentimes gets integrated into these narratives about women's activism is, that women have this inability to get beyond what are their seeming conflicts, and enough to unify around the actual cause. And so, the tensions between certain suffragists was one of the reasons why, some people believe that certain people were not in the room or women weren't invited. And that's no different. That narrative gets played out a lot in women's history. It's definitely something that men do to control who are the power brokers at times. I oftentimes refer to, and in fact, I've just written an article on the March on Washington and women at the March on Washington, and look specifically at the fact that there are no female speakers present at the March on Washington, but the majority of the musical performances are Black women. And so they very much use their musical labor, but they are not interested in their intellectual or their political presence. And so, and the whole rationale is that we can't pick just one woman to speak. And so we don't want to create conflict between them. So this notion of female pettiness, right,
Right.
keeps being incubated.
If I may interject about what Tammy was saying about, that there were these conflicting forces within the women's suffrage movement, it's actually kind of analogous to what's going on now. The two camps were the Alice Paul camp. That was the means that she used was frowned upon because she was a radical. She was an agitator. She did things like, get chained to the White House fence and be taken to jail and going on hunger strike. I mean, in your face resistance, right? And Cady Stanton came from the Susan B. Anthony, let's be pragmatic, let's try to convince and cajole the white legislators to come our way. And so Stanton had ins in Congress and was working that route, right? And Paul was the person out in the streets. And the more dignified Stanton could never, did not approve of Paul's tactics. And today, I mean, you have the squad, right? And then you have the people who are, considered to be the more moderate, let's work in the system, blah, 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 blah. It's the same kind of a conflict. Yeah.
And Joan, did you say that Alice Paul was actually the first person to protest in front of the White House?
Alice Paul, yes. Yeah. She was a genius. I mean, she got her start because she just happened to be in England when there was some actually violent tactics that the women were using there to try to get the right to vote. Yeah. She was in jail in England. She came here, and she started the whole parade thing in DC. Trying to upstage Woodrow Wilson, and she started this. It went on for a long time, and it was happening during World War I. Standing protests in front of the gates of the White House. The women were vilified. They were called unpatriotic because our boys were dying in Europe. Again, these same themes that just keep getting repeated. They were violently attacked by citizens and by police. I mean, yeah.
But Kathy, talk about voter suppression. I mean, bring us to today and what we're experiencing.
Well, there's increasing voter suppression everywhere. Let me see. So we can talk about voter suppression of students. We can talk about voter suppression of um, older people being able to get to the polls. There's a whole litany of things right now, especially closing poll places, um, voter ID laws. And of course, I'm involved in prison work. So, you know, if you get out of prison, you've served your time, uh, can't you vote? So there, I was just reading some statistics before we met, you know, that there are, I don't know, 5.3 million African American people who cannot vote because they have been involved in the um, criminal justice system. There are all sorts of barriers that are being put up, aside from gerrymandering, and yeah, so it's happening on so many different levels, and it's absolutely terrible. And of course, John Lewis, you know, he is so representative of somebody who over his whole lifetime gave his life really to the struggle for voter rights and educating all of us about it and being on the front lines and not being afraid to really die in the struggle. And so we are facing terrible times here, especially during the COVID crisis. But it's really depressing, and it's wonderful, though, at the same time, to feel that there are people like Stacey Abrams who are on the forefront of working on this. I think President Barack Obama is doing work in this area. So this is current. This is happening right now, and I'm extremely worried about it, as I think we all need to be.
And it's only happening because of the 2013 Supreme Court decision, which stripped
Right.
this 1965 Voting Rights Act of a very important protective clause. You know, Ruth Bader Ginsburg called it, you know, by removing this protection, by taking away the umbrella in a storm. So all of these restricts, you know, the ID laws, the closure of polls, et cetera, are all possible because there is no federal oversight anymore on states.
And immediately after that got passed, 14 or 15 states immediately started inhibiting people's right to vote and stopping and minimizing, changing the Voting Rights Act. Yeah.
So take a deep breath, women.
But we cannot rest.
We cannot rest. That's exactly right.
We can get tired. We can catch our breath, but we cannot rest. And I think that's really the heart and soul of this work and this piece and what Joan has created and what the committee who was about this commission is telling the audience, the listener, we cannot rest. And many of us we really had stopped thinking critically. We had stopped telling the stories. We had not empowered the next generation because we thought the next generation didn't need the talk. Whether the talk was about voting, or the talk was about racism, or the talk was about sexism, we stopped having the talks that were so crucial to empowering my particular generation. And I take a little bit of heat for that. I tell my students all the time, I take heat because I'm Generation X, and many of us dropped the ball. We decided it was no longer important for us to talk about civil rights. We felt it was no longer important to talk about, you know, what kind of obstacles you're going to navigate as a person of color or as a woman or as a queer person. We did not empower because we thought we made 2 steps forward, and those 2 steps forward were enough. When we didn't understand that the folks who saw what was happening and how people were being empowered were doing their homework and having conversations and creating a firewall, right? So that they could challenge us. Because we and so if we learn nothing else, we should empower our young people to continue to tell the story, that each generation should continue to tell the story to empower the next generation, and to stop saying get over this and get over that. We should never get over any of these moments in which people have been stripped of their power or brutalized. If anything, we should keep telling it, and so that the healing we can facilitate healing, and we can come to a clear understanding of what has been our historical past and try not to repeat it.
Yeah, I think that in Joan's piece, thank you, Tammy, in her piece, she uses a lot of quotes that kind of move us in the direction forward of people like Coretta Scott King, saying struggle is never a never-ending process. Freedom is never really won. You earn it and win it in every generation. And so that's exactly what Tammy is saying, and her quote is in there.
So we're going to hear another movement from Lifting as We Climb. We're saving the third movement for when you get to hear it in person live. But this is the second movement called Organize, Agitate, Educate. Joan, can you set us up to hear this one?
Oh, sure. This, I have to say, this was the most fun. Well, it was all exciting, but this movement was the most fun to compose because every single line in it is a quote from a suffragist, and all the narratives are the words of Black and white suffragists. But you know, Susan B. Anthony was an amazing person. She didn't really, she had to have someone, actually it was Stanton, I think, that said, honey, you are really something. You need to really take this on the road. She started her career. She was an abolitionist, you know, and she was, well, it's funny that, you know, organize is the first word. What she was known for was her organization. You know, Stanton was the whole, you know, philosophy head kind of person, but Stanton was the one who made it work, right? So it starts that was her organize, agitate, educate will be our battle cry. And today it still is, right? So this starts with a quote of Sarah Grimke, who was an abolitionist, but also a totally feminist. And it's a rather famous quote because Ruth Bader Ginsburg made it really contemporary when she was pleading to the Supreme Court on a women's rights issue. Anyway, it's just a very, the thing has this propulsion to it. Yeah. And it's in the piano accompaniment. It says da 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 da, which is it's this propelling movement. It's kind of like we're moving people, we're moving forward, and that just keeps the whole thing going. And there is a really I just want to briefly reference Elizabeth Carrie Chapman Catt, who was the contemporary of Alice Paul. I think she says, "We'll win the vote. It is the emblem of equality, the guarantee of liberty." Mm-hmm. And that's what this whole thing boils down to, you know, is the vote. It's 2020. We have, if not the most consequential election ever coming. So if anybody's listening to this, vote. Actually, I'm sure you will vote. Get somebody else to vote.
Yeah.
You know.
Following up on what Joan was just talking about this very compelling second movement, I wanted to end with two quotes that bring it full circle. Coretta Scott King first. "Women, if the soul of the nation is to be saved, I believe that you must become its soul." And then John Robert Lewis said, get in good trouble, necessary trouble, and help redeem the soul of America.
Thank you, Kathy and Tammy and Joan, for being a part of this project and also for being a part of this whole streaming today on this important anniversary. To close our program tonight, you're going to hear the second movement of Lifting as We Climb, Organize, Agitate, and Educate, performed by the Denver Women's Chorus, conducted by Mark Zwillig. Thank you.
Let woman then go on, not asking favors, but claiming as a right the removal of all hindrances to her elevation in the scale of being.
We ask justice. We ask liberty. We ask that all civil and political rights that belong to citizens of the United States be guaranteed to us and to our daughters forever.
We take our stand on the solidarity of humanity, the oneness of life, and the injustice of all special favoritisms, whether of sex, race, country, or condition. If one link of the chain is broken, the chain is broken.
Is withheld from one half of its citizens because the word people, by an unparalleled exhibition of lexicon graphical acrobatics, has been turned and twisted to mean those who were shrewd and wise to be born boys instead of girls, or those who took the trouble to be born white instead of black.
Your
All we need is to continue to speak the truth fearlessly, and we will add to our number those who will turn the scale to the side of equal and full justice in all things.
Men, their rights and nothing more. Women, their rights and nothing less.